Hi, this is Ryan Andrews with Miken Technologies. Today we're going to be going over the stamp feature within DocuWare. I am using DocuWare version 7.10, and since the 6 versions, they have moved stamps into the web client. So they're much easier to manage now, much easier to set up. So today I'm going to walk through that process of setting up a stamp and showing what it does. So within DocuWare here, I do have a cabinet that is taking, for example, new patient intake forms. So essentially what happens is my patient comes in, they complete a form within DocuWare Forms online, they submit that form, and then that information gets inputted onto our internal form here for this fake healthcare clinic. So here what I have is a task list set up for all my processed patient intake forms. So you can see here if I click on them, I can see each of these has a status of processed. When a new form comes in, it's not processed. So here on my not processed task list, I can see I have this form here that still needs to be processed. So any user in my organization can have access to this not processed task list. And at that point, what they could do is review the intake form and then stamp it as processed. But we need to create that processed stamp. So this is how we do this. So within DocuWare, we want to go up to our configurations. And within our configurations dashboard, there's an area at the bottom for stamps. So we want to click on this. And this is going to bring up all of our stamps currently in our DocuWare system. To create a new stamp, we click on New Stamp, and I'm going to create what's called a text stamp. And we want to give our stamp a name, so this is going to be called Patient Intake Processed. And here we have our options to create the stamp. So we can add the username, for example, the date and the time. By default, this is going to be on the stamp, so there's nothing you need to actually add to the stamp, but we actually want to make sure that the stamp will also do what we need it to do. So what I'm going to do is have this stamp update the status for my patient intake file cabinet to process. So it's going to change from not process to process once that stamp is applied on the document. So what we want to do is click on Add User Input, and I'm going to call this Processing Status. And this is going to put on the stamp whether or not this patient intake form has been processed or not. You can make this field required. You can also add what's called a field mask. So if you want to add anything like a phone number or email, you can add the mask onto that stamp so that it's formatted correctly. And then we can also add what's called a select list. So I've seen stamps, for example, with user drop-downs. So if they want to put a user on the stamp for that document to go, or for that document to be routed to, we can add a drop-down list that has a list of all the users within the account, and then they can select from that list which user they want. We can also create select lists for really anything you want. So we're going to have processing status on the stamp. On the right hand side here, we can choose what color we want the stamp, what font we want it, if we want a border or not, and then we can also choose whether or not we want the username, the date, and the time on the stamp. So once that is set up, we're going to move on to our indexing field here, or our indexing tab I should say, and this is where we assign the stamp. So I want this stamp to be applied to a specific cabinet, and that's going to be my patient info cabinet. And here's where we would determine what field is going to be updated once that stamp is applied. So this is going to update my status field. I'm going to keep that as a text field, and we want to make this a fixed entry, and I'm going to put the new value as processed. Now there are other options here. We can use a user. We can define. We can add, for example, a user on here, or we can put a predefined value like the current date, time, or the login of the user, for example. But for this example, we're just going to use a fixed text entry of processed. And over on our behavior tab, we can have the option to close a document once the stamp is applied. By default, um, once the document is, or once the stamp is applied, the document does get saved. And we can leave the document open once that stamp is applied. We can even open the next document. So if we have multiple documents that we need to stamp, we can set it up to where the stamp gets applied and then the next document automatically pops up for us to stamp. And then we can also close the document once the stamp is applied. You can also have the stamp remain selected if it's being used multiple times. Then we can also add a signature to the stamp as well. In our next tab over, we have our permissions. So this is where we can either assign a password to that stamp. The user must know the password in order to use it. We can also have this available for only the user to use. And then down here I can add other users and profiles to this stamp. So for this example, I'm just going to leave myself on there, but if I want to add any of my colleagues, I can go through and add them to this stamp. So at this point, I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to go back to my DocuWare, and I'm going to refresh. I'm going to go to my not processed task list here, double click on my document. So if I'm the user, I have access to this task list. I can see I have one document that needs to be processed. And from here I can select my stamp. I can put in my status, and I click on the document to apply that stamp. Now as you'll see here, that document was removed from my not processed task list and it's been moved over to my process list. And you'll see I have now a red notification bubble informing me that I have a new document here. I can then click on it and I can see on this document who stamped it, when they stamped it, what time, and I can see here that the document has been processed because it's updated my status from not processed to processed. So that's how stamps work in a nutshell. You can do quite a bit with stamps. We're always here to assist if you need help with stamps, but that would be like the most basic use case for a stamp.